All right, everyone. Well, I appreciate everyone making it out this morning. I think I missed our last two events, so I'm super grateful that things continue forward when I'm not here. I know Jason wasn't here the last time either, so it's wonderful that things can kind of keep going without us. I always start with some type of gratitude and praise, and I freaking was working out yesterday and hurt my back. And I was in Kentucky this last week, and my dad is getting ready to have a hip transplant. And so I think that was a sign from God to be nicer to my dad when I'm in Kentucky, because, man, having a hurt back has been very painful this morning. Couldn't walk all the way home from the gym. But yeah, I'm super grateful everyone make it out. I'm super grateful for A&N to give us our space here. If you guys don't know Andy Smith, he is the man to know. And as usual, I'm always grateful to have our guest Samuel here. Our goal of our group is always to help everyone through this real estate journey together, figure out their most important next step. One of the things we're always trying to do is give back too. So if you can and are willing to, on our Eventbrite link, you can donate to the Boys and Girls Club of True Value, where I'm on the board of directors. We ask for $10, and all that money goes to their Youth of the Year program. And then lastly, I like to give away a book every time I'm here. I have a book here called Soundtracks. I always try to ask a question. Does anyone have something that they're battling, that they're constantly overthinking about in their real estate journey? Anyone? Stephanie, do you have something you're thinking about? Or I'm just gonna keep looking at you until you want to raise your hand. Is there something that you're battling that you're overthinking about quite a bit right now? Yeah, because Stephanie's starting to work on an ADU. So super exciting that she's going down that path. So yeah, I know overthinking is something I've battled with a ton during my journey as a real estate investor. Should I do this deal? Should I do this deal? And one of the best ways to stop overthinking is to use data to make your decisions. So that was a really good intro there. My friend Jason Wagner provides some of the best data here in Chicago on all the neighborhoods. So I give him 5 or 10 minutes every time so that you guys can make the best informed decisions possible while you guys are investing. So I'll let you kind of run through your thing real quick, Jason.
Appreciate that plug there. And welcome. If this is your first time here, Jason Wagner with Greystone Realty. I'm managing broker and owner of that. All of our agents are required to be investors, so it's kind of a cool thing. I'm an investor myself. Most of my portfolio is on the side. But I do I've got a data and analytics background, so I do like to do this monthly reports. I send it out to everybody that's in my network. So if you want to sign up, there's a QR code. And but it's basically a deep dive of the overall Chicago market and all 77 neighborhoods. So if you go pretty deep, where you look at single family homes, condos, and I kind of give you all the good data stuff. So we're just going to give you the update of what's going on as of April. And I finally have a new story for you guys. We've been here before. I've kind of been saying that prices have been relatively flat. We've been it's kind of been a boring market on the price standpoint. But actually, we finally are starting to see median sales prices in Chicago. They're down 2.3%. So we're starting to actually see prices come down a little bit. 2.3%, nothing to be totally concerned with, but it's very different from what we've been seeing, where it's been relatively flat. We're starting to see market times at 69 days. I do anticipate that market times are going to start to build up a little bit. Months of supply of inventory is at 3.6 months. Inventory is still the biggest challenge that we have in this market. We still don't have enough inventory. And if you're not familiar with months of supply, it's basically if you don't have any more new listings from the market, how long would it take for the current inventory to sell? So basically, in 3.5 months, all of the homes for sale would be gone. So the lower the number, the more of a seller's market we're in, the higher the number more of a buyer's market we're in. So with this over here on the year-to-date change, we're starting to see that kind of tick up. So if we see most of the supply of inventory start to build a little bit, we're probably going to see the prices start to pull down. So, and the reason is under contract activity. This is basically how many buyers we have in the marketplace right now. When we look at a year-over-year perspective, we're down 27%. That's a lot of buyers not in this market from where it was last year, but it's all primarily due to interest rates. We know that interest rates last year were much lower, and so now we're at a much higher rate. And then new listings are down 18% from last year. So this is not often talked about, but we don't have a lot of sellers that are actually motivated to be selling because they've all locked in lower rates. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for them to get rid of their 3% rate and trade up for a 6%. So that's kind of the overall story of the market. If you flip over to the multifamily side, this is very interesting when you look at the landlord perspective. We still continue to see rents rising. We're up 3.9% from last year. And we've got a very healthy vacancy rate of 5.5%. So basically, we've had, and I've seen this on my own anecdotal data, where I've had lease renewals come through. And I know that the market has actually gone through a nice spike up in rents. And you can be aggressive on raising your rents and going to the market. Because we've seen it overall continue to rise. So as you think about your lease renewals and as they come due, take advantage of knowing that you have a lot of momentum on your side to kind of increase your rents. Cap rates have really been unchanged, and multifamily price per unit is still going up. So on the larger multifamily stuff. I want to just point out some quick macroeconomic indicators. So looking at the 30-year fixed mortgage, we're sitting right around at 6.5%. 6.6%, and I plot this against like the consumer price index. This is inflation, right? So we know that interest rates are all tied to where inflation is going. Inflation has been trending downward as the most recent report. We got a nice, better than expected data. We know that the Fed wants to get inflation down at 2%. So I've got this little bar down here. This is where we need to go. The Fed just came out and said, we don't know exactly what we're doing. We're going to pause rates or potentially continue to tighten. So if they make that decision this next month, if they tighten, we probably will see rates end up going back up. And if they pause, we might end up seeing rates down. So it's to watch as we continue to move forward. Here's the interesting chart that I really wanted to show you that was talking about like seasonality and like how many buyers in the marketplace compared to sellers right now. And this is very fascinating because if you look at, this is the blue line here, the plotting last year. And you remember how I said where last year we had this huge pullback in buyers, it's all because of interest rates, right? But what if we looked at what was the market like prior to COVID, before we had this big interest rate surge, or like where we didn't have as many buyers in the marketplace? What was it like in that normalized market? And actually, as we started the first 3 months of the year, we were very close to that 10-year average pre-COVID. This is what like a normal market would be kind of prior to COVID. So we really started out in line with that, obviously very off from last year, but then April really kind of came in low. Okay. So that's a really good indication of how many buyers are in the marketplace right now. And then you can compare that to the listing side, how many sellers we have, and we've just been really far off from where we've been. So we don't have a ton of inventory coming to the market, right? So we still struggle on the inventory challenges, and we will continue to have that. And then finally, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah. So this is overall Chicago. Yeah. Yeah. So cap rates really just haven't really been changing a whole lot. Yeah. And so these are the top 5 north side median sale prices. And so in part of the report that you'll end up getting, if you do sign up for it, so I break it down by condo, single family homes, and 2 to 4 units. So these are all the top 5 neighborhoods based off of those property types and which ones have been performing well. So single family homes, near West Side, Avondale, near North, Lakeview, and Uptown, all up double digits, 2 to 4 units, Avondale, North Park, West Ridge, Uptown, and Albany Park, all doing really well. If you want to see a more detailed report, if you don't see your neighborhood up here, I've got a whole list of all 77 neighborhoods and their median sale prices and how they've been performing this year. Moving on to the south side, these are some of the top 5 Southside median sale price neighborhoods, Woodlawn, up very strongly. A lot of new construction going on there in the single family home market, Woodlawn. Bridgeport, South Lawndale, McKinley Park, South Chicago. Those are some great single family home neighborhoods. 2 to 4 units east of Park Roseland, South Shore, Chicago Long. Those are all double-digit gainers here. And then finally, if you want to just sign up for the report, you can. There's a QR code. You can follow me on Instagram, Jason Wagner, _ real estate.
All right. Thank you as usual, Jason. And yeah, like I said, data is the most important thing for me that drives my decisions. And so I just encourage everyone to make sure that they're, on Jason's list and getting all the information they can to make the best informed decisions that they can. But while I'm figuring this out, so I'm super excited to have Samuel here. He's a Chicago architect, also one of my friends. So it's super nice when we can work with our friends. Everything seems to work much easier and brings more joy to my life when I can have an open relationship with people. Can you maybe just start and give us a super high level view of where you're at right now with your business, and then we can kind of dive into your story?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Samuel Pavlovcik. My firm is Pavlovcik Architecture Inc. We specialize mainly in residential remodeling and new construction, primarily here in the city of Chicago, but as well as the surrounding suburbs. We are licensed in a few other states and have followed work out of state as well. So there's always following opportunities. We also have gotten into some mixed use and commercial work as well, anything from office spaces to restaurants and things like that. So again, always open for opportunities, but primarily our bread and butter has really been a lot of gut remodels, deconversions, new unit adds, or ground up new construction, either single family or multi-unit up to 6 or 8 units. We really focus on efficient turnarounds, focus on working out, having constructability concerns in mind as we're going through our remodeling plans, trying to think of things that are actually going to give you the best value while hopefully minimizing costs or trying to be as efficient as possible. We, as I mentioned, do a lot of work within the city of Chicago. Last year we had about 136 projects, I think, come through our office, and about 90 to 95% of those in the city of Chicago. So we've got projects constantly in and out of the building department. At any given time, we might have anywhere from 10, 15, 20 projects at various stages just within the building department. So we've got a pretty good hand as to what's going on in the department, what are new things that are causing delays, what are new opportunities that we might be able to pursue, how can we condense the schedule, or what are things that we need to watch out for. So we work with a lot of investors. We have that type of mindset. We don't worry as much about material selection and finishes and detailing out 3D renderings or anything like that. Again, we can provide those services if needed for marketing purposes or things like that, but really primarily, we're here to help guide you through the process, guide you through the city, and get your building permit so you can get started.
So I don't consider, but I believe everyone in this room is an entrepreneur, and I'm always wondering, what was your story to get started, and kind of what were some of your biggest challenges opening up your own firm?
Yeah, so honestly, one of the biggest drivers to kind of get started was actually my wife motivating me to just pull the trigger. After graduating, I was just dead set and focused on getting my own architecture license. So I had, made my plan. There's 7 exams I needed to pass. There's 5,600 hours that I needed to accumulate working under another licensed professional. So there's all these kind of caveats into what it takes to get licensed in Illinois, and also getting a national accreditation, which allows me to get registered in other states. So my wife was really like, hey, you're licensed now. Why wait to start your firm? You always said that you wanted to do this, but why wait? So we made the formalities and registered as a business, got the professional design firm status as well. And so we were licensed now for coming up on 7 years. But with that, I always kind of had it as a side project. So I was always really working somewhere full time and then kind of doing this on the side. And really just up until about 2.5 years ago now was where I really decided to make the transition and focus on this full time. I was working full time somewhere, getting enough projects in-house that I was kind of having too much to handle. I'm like, I need to bring on some employees. This doesn't make sense for me to work somewhere else while having this. So that really kind of drove the decision to pull the trigger and just following our project flow.
Yeah, I can totally empathize with that. And I'm sure most people in the room can, because I think that's how it's the easiest way to get started in real estate is doing it part-time. You know, there's much less risk. You can actually buy a property, live in it yourself, which I know a lot of people end up doing, and then slowly kind of migrate to make it your full-time job. Did you know you always wanted to be an architect?
Honestly, yes. It was always something kind of in mind, even from childhood. I knew, coming out of high school, it's exactly what I wanted to do. I took some kind of extracurriculars and drafting and stuff like that, even in high school. I went to IIT, which has a 5-year architecture program, which is unique because most programs are 4-year bachelor's and a 2-year master's. And to get licensed as an architect, you actually need 5 years of schooling. So you end up being required to do that 6 years worth for that master's. With IIT's 5-year program, I was able to get that done in just the 5 years. It's still technically a bachelor's, but you're able to get licensed. And in the end, that's really what matters. Then I ended up going back. During undergrad, I was double majoring with structural engineering, which was just more pain than I should have ever endured. Started the master's program, decided to switch gears and went to construction engineering and management, because at that point I was really like, you know what? It makes no sense to get licensed as an architect, then serve as a associate structural engineer for another 5 years before being able to get licensed. I'd rather transition my background into construction management and having the idea of real estate investment in the future as something that I wanted to pursue. I think I'm going to gain a lot more knowledge based on that. So that's what I ended up doing.
That's almost opposite of what I ended up doing, but that's funny. Yeah. And I took CAD in high school too. And I almost feel like I cheated because there was an honors CAD class. So I got a higher grade point average because of my honors CAD class. So I did well in. And then I studied architecture, and I got all the way through my design portfolio, and then didn't even turn it in and switched to engineering. So, yeah, funny how those stories are completely opposite. But anyways, so, I mean, Chicago permitting and zoning, probably one of the more complicated cities to work in as an architect and an investor. If someone's just getting going on their first project where they need permitting, what would be some things that you want to advise them on to be well aware of to make the process less stressful?
Honestly, I think just having the understanding or expectations of what you'll actually need to go through to obtain the building permit, or just making sure that what you want to do is actually going to be allowed or permitted by right. Someone asked me earlier today, even if the city of Chicago is the most difficult kind of in the area to deal with. Honestly, while they are tricky, they have a lot of different, details on details on details and caveats to this and that. But I think with our experiences with them, we navigate them pretty easily now, even though there's still things that come up. But I have definitely seen some of the suburbs that I personally believe are more difficult to navigate through. A lot of times on the North Shore, or requiring extra things like even just getting a type 1 grading plan and getting a civil engineer involved just because you want to do a 10 by 12 addition onto a single family. So it's like there's definitely some things outside the city that can cause some issues, but specifically in Chicago, they just have a lot of very specific rules and regulations and manners that they interpret their own codes and ordinances that can either become a huge benefit to you or cause a huge amount of headache. So those are really the things to watch out for.
You said a term that I think I want to make sure everyone is aware of, but what does building by right mean exactly?
So with the city of Chicago and any other village, there are codes and ordinances in place for what you are allowed to do with your property. The first thing that you'll go through is the Department of Zoning and the zoning ordinances, and that will basically give you your occupancy use, so what you can use the property for. It will give you the amount of building area that you can construct on the lot. It will require you to have certain setbacks from property lines and tell you where you can build. It'll tell you how tall you can build the structure, all of those kind of general details for your lot.
Okay, and if you can't build by right, then the next course of action is going to be a zoning change.
So there's definitely a few opportunities. And when someone asks me, oh, can I do this, whether it's a zoning related question or a construction related question, I'm an optimist. There's going to be a way. It's just, how much is it really going to cost? How long is it going to take? Is that really going to be feasible? So with the city of Chicago, especially, if you have a lot that's zoned a specific way for a single family, for example, and you want to add another unit to the building, there might be more than just one opportunity. So there's right now the city has the ADU pilot program, which is allowing ADU conversion units or coach house units depending on the pilot area. There are designated areas within the city that are allowing these. So if you're outside one of those areas, you can already write that off. It's not going to be an opportunity for you. Another thing is the administrative adjustment process. That is more so for smaller adjustments. So for example, if you wanted to build a second floor on top of an existing one-story structure, but technically the house is too close to the property line for what they would allow, you can get an administrative adjustment to align the wall of the second floor to the first floor below and not need to worry about going through a full-on zoning variation. The administrative process is a lot easier. We can handle that in-house, and it usually adds about 30 days to the overall permit turnaround time. There's a 15-day hold as part of it, but then it's also an extra few weeks just for the processing and such. And then really the third option is the zoning variation, for which there's two different types. There's the zoning map amendment, which is otherwise known as a zoning change, where you might change the zone of your lot from a single family occupancy to a multi-unit type zone. Or there's a variation, in which case, for example, if your lot area was not enough to build a third unit, but you were within 10%, like you were pretty close but not quite there, you could get a variation to reduce the amount of lot area required per unit to then allow you to add that third unit.
So you're saying there's always a way.
There's always something, and again, it's going to be a question of how long is it going to take, and there's always other things that can play into it. If you want to try and do a map amendment and change your zone, but your alderman is strictly against it, that can be a hard push to try to move forward. So
yeah, one of the other questions we get all the time is regarding Chicago's easy permit process. Can you kind of just outline what the easy permit process is, when it can be used, and how it's different from the traditional permit process?
yeah, absolutely. So the easy permit process is specifically supposed to be used for repair and replace type work. So there's actually even a list online of other things that you can do on an easy permit. So if you're replacing roofing or windows and kind of things like that, we're not making major adjustments to the building. But really, if all you're doing is replacing some finishes in the bathroom or in the kitchen, and maybe you need to move the kitchen sink from one wall to the other, but everything's pretty much in the same area, you're going to upgrade the electrical. All of that can actually be done on an easy permit. And obviously the benefit with the easy permit is it's easy. Anyone can actually apply for it, because you can apply as the homeowner, the general contractor. We honestly handle quite a few of them just because it's still kind of a goofy, convoluted process, especially with the online system. But it usually they get turned around within a couple days, or if you are able to do it in person, as long as you come prepared, you have everything you need, you can walk in and walk out with a permit same day. But they are very restrictive in terms of what you're allowed. It is very common for people to try or to pull easy permits for work that is where their actual scope is a lot larger than what they're saying they're doing, and that can definitely come back and bite you. That can easily lead to a stop work order and, extra fines for that, and then being required to pull together architectural plans, submit for a full building permit, and go through the standard process through that sense. So, anytime you're moving walls or reconfiguring things, that would immediately disqualify you for a easy permit. If you are adding plumbing fixtures, if you're going to, build out a new bathroom in the basement, something like that, that's the only area of work I'm doing. It's just this, already disqualifies you for the easy permit program. So there's definitely some tight restrictions on it.
Yeah, so if you end up using easy permit, you end up doing more work than allowed by the easy permit. First, you do need to get easy permit work inspected, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And so then when the inspection happens and they see that you're doing more than the easy permit, that's when you're likely gonna hit a stop work order.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be the easiest opportunity for it to happen is, you're calling an inspector into the place to view the work that you've done, and they look at it and say, there used to be a wall here, and I can tell that was not allowed on this. What are you doing? So, I mean, you're kind of opening yourself up to that for sure.
And then what about the, something we've run into several times is a final inspection for easy permit.
Honestly, when it comes to the inspection sites, I'll be honest, I don't have the most background and information on the inspections because we really don't handle any of those. Ours is really just through getting the permit approved and then some of the contractors for the inspections. So, whether it's calling for inspections or how to navigate with the inspector or what to say, what to do, honestly, we really don't have that experience. So I don't want to give any guidance on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's helped us more than anything is finding the right people who do know how to navigate with inspectors. So that's one of the things we value most about our subcontractors is like they know inspectors and they know what to say to them. Not what to give them, but what to say to them. Yeah, so that's been super valuable for us. And then, yeah, I know we've just gotten that question several times is, okay, well, what happens if we don't get a final inspection? And I think the simple answer from the research we've done is, you're going to have an open permit because it's not closed. And so if that inspector ends up doing their homework and realizing that that permit isn't closed, then you're at risk for some type of city violation.
Right. And again, at that point, after a certain amount of time, usually it's 6 months, your permit's going to have expired anyway. And so, if they were to look into it, find it, catch it, your permit's now expired, the work you did is above and beyond anyway, now you need to submit plans and permits for a full permit for the work that was done. We do deal with that, honestly, more frequently than we should. But, about work that was done without a permit or it was done, above and beyond the scope and they got, stop work orders. And the way that the city views it is essentially we need to put together architectural plans for the permit that show what the existing conditions were as if the work has not been done yet, and then the proposed conditions for what work already has been done. And from there, they are able to, come out and inspect the property and all of the work that was done, even if your walls are closed up and tiled and everything looks great. If they want you to open up the entire wall and see all of the plumbing, see the electrical, rip everything out, they can make you do that because that work before was done illegally without a permit. We don't know if it was a licensed contractor or whatever it might be. So, without having that permit closed out, it definitely does open up some opportunity for some exposure and liability.
As a real estate investor and one of your clients, what are some things that I could do to be a better client for you?
You're pretty good client. No, honestly, I think that's kind of a loaded question. I think just communication in terms of, what your plan is for the scope is always, very helpful. Just everyone being on the same page for what we're going to do or what we want to do, and knowing that as early as possible. Obviously, we know things change sometimes. Sometimes we decide to do an interior remodel that turns to a second story addition that goes back to an interior remodel. But we understand that happens. But a lot of times the question that we always get asked is how can we make this faster? How can we shorten the timeline? Having things prepared, having these questions answered ahead of time, sticking to your plan. Or, again, one thing you guys usually have, you have your contractors already lined out. You know who you're working with, you know what the plan's going to be. A lot of people don't start that process until too late into the actual portion of it, and that can definitely make a big issue in terms of timeline as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've become more aware of too is it's always kind of a chicken and the egg battle with your architect, your contractor, and your lender. And I think if you can just go into any deal understanding that it's just not going to go perfect because you need something from everyone in that situation, right? You need your architectural plans to get your loan. To get your loan, you also need the contractor's estimate. To get the estimate, you need the architecture plans. And so you have all these three things that are all coming together at the same time, and they don't come together at the same time because you need one thing to get another thing. And so, you know, the biggest piece of advice I can give is just like understand that part of the process, and that each person needs their amount of time to do their amount of work, because when we feel rushed, I can speak for ourselves, like we don't do as good of work. You know, we miss things, we're trying to get things done, and when we're, you know, well, I found this way, sometimes we're trying to people please our clients too much, opposed to setting up boundaries and saying, hey, we need 2 weeks to get this done. And, you know, every client is just pushing. And I'm sure you feel the exact same thing, even sometimes from us as well.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a common occurrence. And especially, I mean, in the end, you know, time is money, right? And all of this can make a huge difference. If you took 6 or 9 months to do a process that you expected to take 4 months, but you also could have gotten done in 3 months, that's a huge amount of difference. You know, I mean, especially when you have this, you know, huge property, your holding costs are over $6,000 a month, and it just keeps kicking down the road, moving down. And I mean, and honestly, I know that's been, you know, that's been part of the issue too. Like we do see that frequently where it's like, well, you know, before I can get the bids from the contractor, they need plans, but before I want to spend money on plans, I want to know that I can afford it, right? And so it's kind of this back and forth. And not to advocate for ourselves, but I mean, in honesty, you know, the architectural fees inside of things is probably the most, you know, minute portion of any of your general fees. So I mean, even if you're going to spend $6,000 on architectural plans to get it all the way through like a full detailed level that you could get a nice accurate bid on, like instead of just getting halfway through and spending $3,000 and kind of pausing there, causing 2 months delay, bouncing back and forth, that extra $3,000 that you spent just to get this finished out might have saved you 2 months worth of holding costs. And on a building that costs you, you know, $4,000, you know, a month, that's already $5,000 in your pocket.
Yeah, I found that, you know, time ends up being the thing that costs us the most typically. And yeah, I don't think there's anything that can save us more time than having the right people on our team, having the right contractor, having the right architect, having the right broker, and having the right lender. If you get the right people on your team who have worked together multiple times on multiple projects, it's just going to be a more fluid deal every time. And I think that, you know, has always been my goal, is to find people who are really good at what they do and get those people on my team so that every deal I have is as fluid as possible. Does anyone have any questions that we can open up for Samuel, specifically about Chicago zoning and permitting? Does anyone have? Yes, perfect. Give me.
As it pertains to
So the question was, what is the expected cost for any development or redevelopment, and what the timeline would be for the permitting costs? Yeah, go ahead.
So the city of Chicago does actually have an online tool that you can use to punch in the information for calculating permit fees. I can honestly say that we do not include the permit fees in our fixed price proposals because even with our experience, we can't get that tool to work very well. There's different checkboxes that you need to make, and each one will cause a different multiplication factor, and then based on the square footage of the area that you're doing. So it's kind of a complex calculation that goes into it. You know, using that tool, I think if you know exactly what you're looking for to put in, it can definitely get pretty close. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, it can skew quite a bit. Your typical project is going to have a fee due at the time that we're submitting for the project. That's $375, 300 to the Department of Buildings, 75 to the Department of Zoning. And then from there, they go through, do the full review, and then at the end, they assess the final fee. In addition to the permit fees, which, like I said, you can find some of that tool online. If this was a vacant lot that you're developing, or if you're tearing down a building and adding units, or even just adding units to an existing building, there are other factors as well. There's something called the open space impact fee, which essentially adds additional fees based on the size or square footage of the individual units and then how many units are applied. If you are demolishing a existing 2-unit and then building a new 3-flat, you can offset those units, but you need to provide the demolition permit that shows this was a 2-unit building that was demolished. We are now constructing 3. At least 2 out of those 3 can be, transferred over. So you only have to pay the fee for 1. So sorry if that doesn't necessarily directly answer the question, but it's there are some tools to assist. On the underwriting side, I wouldn't necessarily have that information, but in terms of the actual architectural side, like once we are engaged, if this is a new construction project, were you saying, or for example, we would typically start by, obviously the first thing is the zoning analysis, making sure we can build what you want to build. So assuming all of that is kind of done and through, we typically start with putting together a few proposals, which can take anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months, depending on the size of it. Usually our initial proposals would be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. From there, we have an open coordination design back and forth where some clients know what they want. It's easier to work with and come to conclusions and decisions, so that back and forth can be pretty limited. We can have a design accepted within a week or 2. Other clients will take 3 to 4 weeks just to do over looking at some drawings and come back and not really have much information for where they're going. So that's the portion that's really open-ended, that you as a client could have the most impact. And then usually once we do have the design detailed and finalized, again, depending on the size of the project or what it might be, we'd usually do anywhere from about 2 to 4 weeks from finalizing the architectural drawings to get ready to submit for the building permit. Depending on the type of work, the level of work, we might need to get a civil engineer involved. Usually we would get them involved as soon as we've got the design accepted, so that work can kind of overlap. Usually our timelines fall pretty well in place, but again, that can vary depending on what structural engineer you're working on. In addition to the structural engineering, the city does have some requirements occasionally for what they call the structural peer review, which is basically once you have an engineer develop their report of the structural engineering for your property, you as the client then need to hire a second engineer to peer review their work and then do a full report on that and submit that as part of your permit. So again, just knowing what you're going to need and having these things in mind, the sooner you can get started on it. If you have everything all together by the time you're submitting, even better. And then, as far as the actual permit review side, I think one thing that wasn't necessarily mentioned earlier in terms of the building permits is once it's a scope that's above your easy permit, and assuming you don't need any supplemental zoning like administrative adjustments or variations or anything like that, with the full permit process is called the standard plan review. And there is a expedited portion of that for specific projects called the self-certified plan review. In that, essentially what happens is it's a program that the city had started for licensed architects that can become self-certified by meeting a certain list of requirements and going through this training program. And basically what that means is the architect is certifying that the plans conform with all the building codes. When we submit for a self-certified project, it goes to a general project manager and it goes to the Department of Zoning. And typically that's it. Once zoning is approved, it goes back to the PM, they can finalize, closes out the project, it's done. We, right now, I would say average for like gut rehab or like 3-unit or single family, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. We've had them turned around in as little as 2 days before. We've also had them take 6 to 8 weeks, kind of depending on where the department's at. When it comes to standard plan review, the biggest difference is now instead of only going to a project manager and to the zoning reviewer, it gets distributed to each individual department. So you've got a arc and fire review, plumbing, electrical, ventilation. So now all of a sudden there's 6 different people that this needs to cross their desk. They each need to do their own reviews. And then if they have comments, they issue it back. You need to revise for the comments, resubmit. So that would be why the standard plan review can easily take 3 to 4 months compared to your 3 to 4 weeks. And again, there are limitations to what projects can be self-certified. One of the biggest things that we run into most of the time is the disqualifying feature of adding a unit to an existing building. So if this is a 2-unit building and we want to do a basement ADU conversion unit, or if we by right happen to be able to add a 3rd unit, that can no longer qualify for the self-certified plan review process. That being said, if we wanted to tear that down and build a ground up new construction 3-unit building, that's okay. It doesn't necessarily need to make sense. This is just how the city is with their processes. So we just need to kind of comply and conform to those. So.
You have a question too, Mark?
I was going to ask about peer review. Just someone checking someone's homework, something like that. But you come and explain yourself work on.
Right, and it does actually, like the city has requirements for the structural peer review for specific items. The reason that it's actually beneficial is because it can avoid the project from going to the city's structural review, which means likely you're going to save time by doing the peer review yourself. And that's similar to the self-certified program. There is a certain registration that structural engineers need to have with the city to be a certified peer reviewer as well. So not necessarily every structural engineer can.
Is there anything things with an structural and last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Do you want to repeat it? Can I hear?
Yeah, so just has there been any updated code requirements that real estate investors should know about?
So the latest kind of large code change was in 2019, where the city made a change to really try to get closer in line with the just the national building code or international building code. Honestly, the biggest things that we've seen that impact investors have more so been either on the zoning side of things, where they've got some new ordinances or overlay districts and things like that that can make a huge impact to your property, or certain things that the city's starting to maybe enforce a little bit more frequently. I know one of the biggest ones has been the water service upgrades. The city of Chicago code is more strict than what the state of Illinois code would allow for in terms of allotted water fixture units for a service size. That being said, the city's really trying to push to get rid of these lead lines anytime they can. And if they can put it off on you as the homeowner or the investor, they definitely want to. So really, the majority of the time, a lot of these buildings have water service lines that would now be considered undersized, and they're also old, lead service lines. And especially if you are adding a bathroom or doing kind of extensive work to the building where you're going to be replacing the majority of the plumbing anyway, I would say it's a pretty good chance that you would end up needing to replace that water service line. That obviously can be a huge impact to cost that might not have been planned for us.
For that pilot program, we should have is a non-starter.
Yeah, so the question was regarding the pilot program for ADUs and having designated areas. Essentially, there's, I think, 4 or 5 different ADU pilot areas, and they do have slightly different regulations as well. So that's something else to look into. But in terms of if you wanted to, in the example, if you've got a 2-unit building, unfinished basement, you want to add a basement unit. It's going to depend on your lot itself, whether you can or can't add it. If you are in the ADU, one of the ADU pilot areas, you definitely have a lot better shot of doing it. There's still not necessarily a guarantee, but so far we haven't had any that have not been able to do it. But if you have a 2-unit building that is not within an ADU area, it's not necessarily a hard cutoff that says you can't. For example, if you had a building that's zoned RT4, that allows for 1 residential unit for every 1,000 square feet of lot area. So even if it was only a 2-unit building, but it's on a standard, 3120 square foot lot, you have over 3,000 square feet. That means you can have 3 units by right in that building. So from a zoning perspective, yes, you'd be able to add that 3rd unit by right. Then you just need to also get it through the building part. So, but it's not necessarily a hard cutoff. Right. So like by right would be, again, for RT4, they require 1,000 square feet of lot area per residential or per unit. So if your lot is more than 3,000 or 3,000 square feet or more, you can have 3 units in accordance with the ordinance. So you don't need to worry about any special acceptance. If, for example, you had a lot that was 2,995 square feet and you are just shy of that 3,000, that is a hard cutoff. No, you do not meet it by right. And now you would need to look into pursuing a zoning variation for reducing the amount of lot area per residential unit to be able to add that 30.
One of the projects I've done at the time, the plans that called for cast iron for basement build up. And I just remember thinking, can I do PVC? You kind of talked about like the differences if there's programs with PVC underground plumbing versus cast iron. I know in the construction, what's going on?
Yeah, so that actually was, that's actually a good point for another code that was relatively recently updated. Previously in the city, they required any underground plumbing to be cast iron. For a while, they initiated this ACAR program, an alternate code approval request for changing cast iron below grade to PVC, allotted for residential buildings up to a certain number of units. That was kind of just this extra supplemental process that we need to submit some extra paperwork, but really it was getting approved pretty easily. Since then, they've actually done away with that program and they have actually initiated that into the code, where now for residential buildings, and again, up to a certain number of units, you can just, in compliance with the code, use PVC underground. So that is something else, and again, for recent code changes that has modified. And again, that was something exciting to deal with the city, right? Is they came out with this idea. Now everyone just needs extra paperwork. Then there was about a 2 or 3 week window where they stopped the program, but didn't officially initiate it into the code yet. So there was this weird little window where if you applied a week ago, you could have done this ACAR, or now we don't know when this thing's going to get approved, or, oh no, it's going to be another 2 weeks. So we're just going to have to wait until that gets done. But that's, at least now it's all.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they could use your architectural services?
Honestly, you can look us up online. The easiest, so I've shortened the website because my last name is exciting. Instead of Pavlovcik Architecture, it's just pav-arch. So it's P as in Peter, A, V as in Victor, then dash or hyphen, and then arch.com. So you can look us up on Google. You can check out our website, check us out on Instagram. Phone number, email address, all the contact info's on there. But yeah, feel free to grab me after this as well. I plan to stick around for fun.
Yeah, so if you guys have any more questions, definitely come up. I've worked with Samuel many times and highly recommend working with them. And for us, we're Quality Builders Inc. on Instagram, Facebook, and every other social handle, and just Quality Builders on the web. The other thing I just always leave with everyone is just make sure you continue to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I think this is, one of the most important traits we can build is being able to walk up and talk to people and ask for help. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.